There's a specific kind of silence that happens right after you get exactly what you wanted. Maybe it was the promotion, maybe it was the house, or the moment the last kid moved out, and the hard work of parenting was technically done. You expected a surge of relief, or at least a sense of arrival, but instead, you felt a strange, hollow quiet. If you've ever looked at your life and found yourself asking, why doesn't this feel like enough? I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. You aren't ungrateful and you aren't burned out. You've simply reached the top of a ladder that wasn't designed to carry you any further. What you're experiencing has a structure, and today we're going to name it.
Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles, and on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become passion struck.
If you look at any architectural blueprint, the foundation is the part you never see once the building is finished. But it's the only part that determines how high the structure can actually go. In the season of becoming, we talked about reclaiming worth. We talked about small, courageous choices. We talked about clearing noise so that you could hear yourself again. But as we step into the Meaning Makers series, the foundation isn't something you go out and acquire. It's not a new degree. It's not a new title. It's not a smarter set of goals for 2026. The foundation is what's already there. It's what becomes visible when the success that you've been spending years building finally stops answering back. That quiet disorientation we talked about earlier, that's not a character flaw or a failure of ambition. It's structural feedback. Most of us are taught to define ourselves by our scaffolding, the jobs, roles, and external validation that prop us up while we're building. And scaffolding is useful. It's necessary for what I call the construction phase of life, but it's temporary. The quiet arrives when you reach a stage where scaffolding isn't enough anymore. When the weight of your life has changed, and what you need now is some load bearing. In Passion Struck, I talk about doing a mosquito audit, clearing the invisible suffocators, bloodsuckers, and pain in the asses so that you can breathe again. The foundational work is the internal, spiritual version of that. It's clearing away the clutter of who you were supposed to be so that you can recognize who you actually are. And that's why I want to challenge the idea that this moment requires definition. We're constantly told to quote unquote define your mission statement, but that usually just sounds like more work, another task for an already full inbox. What actually helps here is recognition. Foundations aren't chosen in moments of high octane ambition. They're revealed when the noise drops. They're the values that remain true when no one is watching, even when there's no reward attached and there's no win. We know that this isn't just philosophical, it's biological. Humans are wired for connection and contribution that doesn't demand a return. That's not something you manufacture, it's something you recognize. As Mark Nepo reminded us yesterday, the geography of the second half of life requires a different way of seeing. You don't find your foundation by looking further ahead. You find it by looking deeper down into the soil of what has already survived your hardest seasons. So let me pause here on a simple reflection. When you strip away the title on the door, the number in the bank, and the noise of everyone else's expectation, what still feels solid under your feet? That's your foundation. And once you recognize it, something powerful happens. You stop trying to prove your worth and start inhabiting it. So, we have just looked at the hidden foundation beneath the scaffolding of success, that internal shift from proving your worth to finally inhabiting it. But once that foundation is revealed, the question becomes, how do we build upon it without burning out? We're going to dive into the second element of the architecture, but before we do, I want to pause on something important. Listening to me describe the difference between your scaffolding and your foundation is one thing. Actually standing on that foundation, especially when the world is trying to hand you more scaffolding is another. That tension is exactly what we designed the Ignited Life to hold. This architecture isn't built overnight. It's built through the quiet, consistent choice of alignment over achievement. That's why each episode in the Meaning Makers series is paired with specific reflection tools inside the community. We help you to map your own architecture of significance by asking questions that the noise usually drowns out. Questions like, what parts of my scaffolding am I finally to let go of? Is this weight I'm carrying today designed to support others or just to sustain my own image? Inside the Ignited Life, you'll find weekly props tied to my interviews, along with identity and agency practices to help you move from extraction into true circulation. You can join us at theignitedlife.net. Before the break, we were looking at the foundation, the quiet internal recognition of what still feels solid under your feet when the titles and the noise are stripped away. But as any architect will tell you, a foundation isn't a destination, it's a beginning. If we stay only in the foundation, we are safe, but we aren't yet significant. For the structure of our lives to actually hold weight, for it to matter to the world around us, that energy has to move. It has to rise. And that brings us to the second element of a life built for meaning. Once a foundation is revealed, the next question is inevitable. What does this foundation actually support? In architecture, foundations don't exist for their own sake. They exist so weight can move, so force can travel safely through a structure without it collapsing under its own gravity. That's where the pillars come in. Pillars aren't decorative. They aren't symbolic. They exist to carry a load and to transfer the weight outward. The same is true in a life that feels significant. For most of our early adulthood, we're trained explicitly or not to live extractively. We ask, what can I get from this job, from this relationship, from this effort? Extraction makes sense when you're building stability. You need resources. You need momentum. You need proof that your effort leads somewhere. But extraction has a ceiling. At some point, it stops feeding you and it starts hollowing you out. That's when something shifts. Not because you've suddenly become more virtuous or outgrown your ambition, but because your nervous system begins to ask a different question. Not what can I get, but what can move through me? We are wired for circulation. As I discussed on Tuesday with Stephen Post, research into altruism shows that humans regulate stress and restore resilience, not through accumulation, but through contribution that doesn't demand a return. Giving isn't something we do after we're fulfilled. It's one of the ways fulfillment is generated in the first place. That's why service that feels forced drains us, but service that feels aligned restores us. The difference isn't the effort, it's the direction. Most people discover this before they ever even name it. They began giving in one of three ways: through presence, showing up fully without trying to fix or perform; through ability, using what they're good at in service of something beyond themselves; and through resources, time, access, or energy that creates ease for someone else. Long before we call these time, talent, or treasure, we feel them. And when they circulate freely, when they're not transactional or performative, they begin to hold weight. To understand the true power of this shift, you have to look at the great cathedrals of Europe: Carthage, Notre Dame, Salisbury. If you study the history of these structures, you'll notice something unusual about the people who built them. The master masons, the glass cutters, the laborers hauling stone, almost none of them lived to see the buildings finished. They spent their entire lives contributing to a structure they knew would only be completed by their grandchildren. In our modern world, we've been taught to be the master masons of our own lives. We want to design the building, lay the stone, and cut the ribbons ourselves. We want success on a timeline that we can personally enjoy. But here's the counterintuitive insight: the most significant structures in human history were built by people who never expected to stand under the finished roof. They weren't motivated by achievement, they were motivated by atmosphere. They weren't building monuments to themselves, they were building spaces where others would eventually feel at home. This is the shift from extraction to circulation. Success tends to be terminal. It's a project with a clear end, But significance is transgenerational. It's a structure that carries forward because it was never meant to stop with you. So the quiet disorientation you feel after a big win isn't a signal that you haven't achieved enough. It's a signal that your life is asking to be lived in a different direction, from accumulation to contribution, from proving to participating. These are the pillars of a significant life. They don't drain you, they stabilize you. Because when meaning circulates, it doesn't leave you empty, it leaves you connected. So, if the foundation is the integrity of your character and the pillars are the ways you circulate your contribution, then we have to talk about the windows. Once circulation begins, once your energy is no longer collapsing inward but moving outward, something subtle changes. It isn't necessarily what you do, but how you see. In architecture, windows are not about decoration, they're about orientation. They determine what light enters a space, what views are framed, and what the inhabitants learn to notice. For much of our lives, our attention is drained outward. We focus on the facade. We learn to scan for approval, opportunity, and threat. We obsess over how the building looks from the street, managing perception and performing for an audience. This is the adaptive phase. It helps us survive and succeed. But eventually, the question of how am I being seen begins to hollow us out. The maps that once worked begin to fail. And the question quietly turns from, is the world looking at me, to, am I actually seeing the world? This is the movement from facade to window. A facade is about presentation. A window is about perception. A facade manages impressions. A window invites presence. And here is the shift that surprises people. This change doesn't come from inside alone, it comes from a place of grief. It comes from realizing that the ways that you once engaged the world, the performance, the hustle, the polishing of the image, no longer work. You may notice it as strange restlessness or a quiet sadness that arrives without explanation. What's actually happening is that your nervous system is no longer satisfied with surface contact. You don't want louder experiences, you want truer ones. You don't want more stimulation, you want more meaning per moment. I call this attentional maturity. It's the ability to let fewer things matter so that what does matter can register more deeply. Windows narrow the field of view, but they deepen it. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing resonance. You begin to notice texture instead of volume and depth instead of scale. You listen longer before responding. You feel less urgency to comment. The shift isn't a withdrawal from life, it's a more honest engagement with it. That is why significance often grows quieter with age. It's not because your life is shrinking, but because your attention is becoming more precise. You stop needing the whole world to see you and you start caring whether you are truly seeing what's in front of you. A child, a friend, a moment of beauty that would have gone unnoticed in the facade phase of your life. This is the reglazing of the windows. Same structure, but a different clarity. And when your perception changes like this, your presence changes too. You begin to inhabit your life rather than to perform it. You become less impressive and more real. And that sets the stage for the final element. Because once a life is grounded, once energy circulates and attention matures, the question becomes, what kind of shelter does this life now provide? Once a life is grounded in a foundation that doesn't move, once your energy circulates rather than collapses, and once your attention matures so that you are truly seeing the world, one final question remains. What kind of shelter does this life now provide? In architecture, the roof is the most vulnerable part of the structure, but it's the only part that makes the building habitable. Without it, the walls are just an enclosure. With it, they become a home. For much of our lives, we are led to believe that the goal of life is to build a monument. A monument is designed to be looked at from a distance. It's built to say, I was here. I achieved this. Look at the scale of my reach. But monuments are cold. You can't live inside a monument, and you certainly can't find shelter there when the storms of life arrive. In the architecture of significance, the goal is to build a shelter. When you move from performance to presence, you aren't just improving your own outlook, you're creating a space where other people finally feel safe. You become the person who can hold space for a friend in crisis without needing to be the hero of their story. You become the leader who provides the load bearing support that allows a team to take risks. You become the parent or partner whose very presence says, "You are covered, you are safe here." That is the ultimate evolution of the meaning makers. A life of significance is a building where others feel at home in your presence. So, as you head into this weekend, I want to leave you with that one reflective question we opened with. If you stop trying to build a monument to your success today, what part of your life is already providing shelter for someone else? Don't look for a grand gesture. Look for the atmosphere you create. Look for the people who lean on you, not because of your title, but because of your soul. Success is when you add value to yourself. Significance is when you add value to others. As Stephen Post showed us, this is your biological destiny. As Mark Nepo reminded us, this is the true geography of your second half of life. And as we've seen today, this is the very architecture that holds when everything else falls away. Taking that step, moving from building a monument for yourself to becoming a shelter for others, is the hardest and most rewarding work we will ever do. But as we discussed today, you don't have to do it all at once, and you certainly don't have to do it all alone. Before you move on with your day, I'd encourage you to pause. Look at the one thing or one person right in front of you. Can you offer them 60 seconds of your shelter without trying to fix, manage, or impress them? That's the small moment of containment in the first stone in the shelter you're building. It's how we repair the structure of our own lives. If you want support applying these ideas, join me inside theignitedlife.net. And remember to check out You Matter Luma for a reminder that your significance isn't something you have to build, it's something you already possess. Looking ahead to next Tuesday, I'm joined by Stephen Sloman, a cognitive scientist and author of the new book, The Knowledge Illusion. We're going to deconstruct the boundary of the mind, exploring why we think we know more than we do, and how the illusion of knowledge can actually prevent us from finding true meaning. In that conversation, Steve and I explore why our minds are designed for collaboration rather than solo storage, and why "I don't know" might be the most important foundation for your growth in 2026. It's a powerful follow-up to our work today on the community of the self.
If you really want to make good decisions, you need people with contrasting views to yours, right? You don't necessarily need them to generate ideas, to generate hypotheses, but you need them to test those ideas. Like the best way to perfect your own thinking is to describe it to someone who disagrees with you vehemently. And that way you'll construct really good arguments.
Thank you for walking this first week of the Meaning Makers with me. Remember, choose gentleness over force, choose space over weight, and live like the life you're becoming is to be the shelter for others.